Why, hello. I have a story for you, and I'm sure many of you have heard me talk about this or at least reference it, but I want to tell this story from a slightly different vantage point because I've had some new realizations about this. So when I was 20, I went through this season of life where I lost close to everything. It's like I lost all my money, all my clients, my apartment, my best friend from college. I lost 2 cars. I even lost what felt like my plans for the future. Like the entire trajectory of my life completely shifted during this season. And I ended up getting in contact with this woman who offered me a room to stay for 1 month, just in the spare bedroom of her house. The thing about this situation is it felt like there were so many complicating factors that were so overwhelming that I didn't even know where to begin. What do I even start with? And while it felt slightly irresponsible at the time, the only thing that I knew to do was just meditate every single day. And I'm not talking about a quick 15-minute guided meditation. I'm talking about hours and hours and hours and hours every single day. There were some days I remember calculating like 6 or 8 hours of meditation. I was doing it like it was my full-time job. And I remember having a conversation with my mentor at the time, and I was explaining to her that I felt lazy for doing this. Like it felt so irresponsible, or like how can I be facing all of these challenges and choose to sit in meditation? There was part of me that felt like it was wrong. And I remember she told me at the time that I had such a distorted definition of what laziness is, because in her perspective I was doing the heavy lifting and I just didn't realize it at the time. She viewed it as I was putting in the work every single day. When you're sitting in the fire, I think you have a very difficult time seeing yourself as actually doing the work because it's so counterintuitive and it completely contradicts what most people probably would have advised that I do at that time. Long story short, everything came through. I wasn't spending hours on Zillow every day or pounding the pavement or doing any of that. Everything came through so effortlessly and so in such a clean way that even to this day, it's one of those periods of my life that I continually reflect on because it was shockingly easy. Not the meditation part, but the unfolding of how everything came into my world was so effortless that it blew my mind. And the fact that I was able to, while in a time crunch, get everything that I needed and more and make it out of that really dark season of my life is something that has continually perplexed me. Since then, I noticed there was this cycle that began to emerge for me where I would spend a lot of time in meditation, not 6 hours, okay, that's way over the top, but at the time I didn't know what else to do. So I just kept pouring more and more hours into meditation, but it's not necessary, okay, just so we're clear. But I would go through this period of doing a lot of meditation. Things felt buttery smooth. It was like, yes, I'm taking action, but it feels effortless. It feels natural. There's no resistance. The right people, places, and things are flowing into my experience. It was just so smooth. And then what would end up happening is as the manifestations would roll in, that also came with more responsibility. And I would find myself getting really lost in the action side of things. And here's where it gets interesting. As I would get lost in action and I stopped prioritizing all of this other stuff that's really the most important thing for me, at least, what I began to notice is that anytime I would start losing myself in action, there would be something that would happen in my life that would demand my focused attention. And it would usually show up in the form of some type of minor crisis. Something stressful would happen, something would be really frustrating, there would be some type of problem that would show up. And if there was a lot of momentum that I had going around taking action, as I would feel like the discomfort of the situation, I would try to alleviate that with more action. So it went exactly like this. There'd be an uncomfortable situation in my life. There'd be a problem in my life. I'd feel the discomfort, try to fix it with action. Nothing would change. The problem would persist. My stress would persist, or the situation would get even worse. The more I try, the worse it gets. The more I try to fix it, the more action I take, the worse things get, until I have no option to go back into meditation. Now, I can't say that that's a universal experience. Of course, we're all different. We all have different ratios of how much action and how much being or meditation works for us. I happen to lean really, really heavy on the energetic side of the spectrum, more so than action. And every time I would come back into my meditation practice, it was like I could feel the layers of resistance melting off of my body. Like just everything would start to clear itself up and sort itself out. And I mean, there's a lot of Eastern philosophies that talk about this, that a lot of the time the problems in our lives do not demand as much attention and as much action and as much effort and as much trying as we often give them. At least in my experience, it's very true that, at least for me, trying makes things worse, which is that completely defies a lot of what modern culture will tell you. What I caught myself doing mentally is, as more manifestations would flow into my life, at a certain point, I got it in my mind that I needed to be responsible, or like there was a certain point in time where I should stop doing the thing that I know works and shift into being primarily action-based, which is not true for me. That might be true for other people. It's not my correct composition in this life. There was something that happened recently where there was something that happened in my life that was distressing. I didn't know how to fix it, so I chose to go into meditation and got a same-day solution. Literally within hours. I went from being terrified to having a solution a few hours later. And then in the days that followed, I kept meditating more and more and more every single day. And I was really thinking to myself, like, what am I doing? What is going on? Because I could feel myself, it's like the more I meditated, the more resistance would melt off of me, the lighter I felt, the less mental chatter I had, the fewer intrusive thoughts would pop into my mind. And let me put it this way, things continued to get better and better and better and better very rapidly. So this most recent time, I really started to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. Like, what exactly have I been doing? Because it's so consistent now, I can't deny it. Like, this has been happening for years. And many of you have heard me talk about this over and over. It's like a running joke with me, where I'm like, if I ever stop meditating, someone needs to come over and shake me, slap me across the face. Never, ever, ever let me stop doing this, just because of how smooth and effortless it makes everything. And even like, I was shocked that I went from like fear to peace in such a short amount of time. And then things continued to improve, continued to improve, continued to improve. everything unfolded so rapidly and so quickly. It got me thinking about the different components of speed and allowance. And what I realized is most of the time I talk about the fuel side of the conversation, because that is really important. If you don't have enough fuel, then you're not really going to go anywhere fast. So the fuel source matters. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the conversation about sandcastles, it's a podcast episode that I did, but that's one of the reasons why so many people liked that conversation, is because it's a discussion about your fuel source, essentially. But the other side of the conversation is about levity. That's like the other key factor when it comes to speed. The imagery that came to mind is like, imagine that you want to go 100 miles an hour down a highway. You want zero traffic to go that fast. And the thing about resistance is the more resistance you have, the more that's heavy traffic. So you can't go very fast when you have a lot of resistance. And the way that you can think about resistance is like opposing thoughts, the negative narrative, the negative storytelling that you have going on in your mind. Or it can also be you feeling the discomfort within you, you looking at the situation around you, you feel the pain, you feel the discomfort, you feel the fear, and so you start frantically taking action as a result. That's also resistance, because what it perpetuates is, I'm trying so hard and it's not working. And then that feeds into the pain narrative, that feeds into the painful story that you're quote unquote living. When really we could talk about you're living a story in your mind, but I don't want to get into all of that. The point is, it is very difficult to go fast when you're weighed down with so much baggage. And it's very difficult for miracles to find you when you keep blocking them, when you're speaking against them, when you're opposing them, when you're ruminating and dwelling in feeling states that you don't want to be in. One of the reasons why I think when I go through these seasons of prioritizing doing a lot of meditation is I realize it, first of all, dissolves resistance, but then also as I go through the day, the negative stories are not as active. What I know for sure from my own life and my own experience is if I feel like I'm efforting, it's not working, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not making progress, nothing is happening, that's a resistance issue. And if you're wanting forward motion, forward progress, getting to whatever it is that you desire, there's two ways to go about it. Either you need a high quality fuel source that outweighs your resistance, or you need low resistance, because this is a ratio game. And the most painful experience to have is having equal fuel and equal resistance, because that's when you feel like you're spinning your wheels in the mud. And we want forward motion. We want a lot of fuel and no resistance, because then you have an open highway and a really fast car. I've touched on this briefly in a couple different places, but if you didn't know, my work is going to be evolving. And so I do feel myself starting to transition out of teaching energetics, but I felt like there was one more piece that I still needed to teach in order for me to feel like this era of my work is really complete. And so there's going to be one more strictly energetic program, which is called Light Speed, if you didn't know. And I have been referring to this as like my final energetics program. I feel like this is the last piece that I really have to give. So we will be starting that program next week, and then this chapter is closed and we are on to the next. So you're welcome to check that out. You know where to find all the goods, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.